Whose is that? Good morning. Do you guys know how nervous I am every time I get up here and talk to you guys? She does. But I look around this room and I see a bunch of friends. Some people I don't know, I'm looking forward to meeting, but a bunch of friends. So as friends, will you guys do something for me? Can you just repeat after me? Can you say, God is going to move you, even if you suck? Good enough? I feel better. So we've covered a lot. We're going, for those of you who don't know, we're going through the Bible and we're reading it in a linear fashion. So it's like this happens and this happens and this happens, and there's not a whole lot of overlap like we find in the real Bible. Who brought their storybook? Anybody? Yeah, that's good. So that's the book we're in. If you guys don't have a copy of that, we have some in the back. Those are for you to take because we want you to be able to follow along. But so far we've covered creation, we've covered Adam and Eve, the fall, the flood, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, the Israelites going into Egypt, Moses and the Exodus out of Egypt and the Passover, and the new covenants on Mount Sinai, the 10 Commandments, the Mosaic Covenant, that's what they call it in the fancy circles. And so that's kind of a lot. So I think it's about time that we go on a road trip. You like my road trip thing? I made that. Just proud of myself. This is not your typical road trip. This is a road trip with 1 to 3 million people. That's a lot of people traveling. And they're following a pillar of fire at night and a cloud by day. So God's literally leading them. They don't have a map. Oh yeah. For those of you under 20, a map is like an analog version of a GPS. It's like on paper. I don't know. Ask your parents. And their destination was the Promised Land. They were going to the land that God had promised their forefather Abraham over 650 years ago. This is stuff they talked about over dinner. We're going to get to the Promised Land. They're going to show us. God is going to bring us there, and it's to be a land flowing with milk and honey. And we learned last week that God's in the Mosaic Covenant, God is actually going to live among his people in the Promised Land. And so they're psyched. They're pretty excited about it, but they got to take a road trip to get there. Now, show of hands, who has ever been on a road trip? Leave them up. You ready? Now, who likes road trips? Oh, wow, lots still up. Good. I love road trips. It's usually just me and my beautiful wife, Nadine. We're driving. We're forced to talk to each other, so it's wonderful. And telling stories about when we were kids and all the embarrassing things. But usually the first thing we do is we got to pick a place to go. I mean, that's obvious, right? And that's part of the fun. Like, where can we go? We can go anywhere. And the second part is we got to figure out how to get there. And Nadine and I do this a little bit differently. I remember last year we were going to California for my little brother's wedding. He got married next to the pier at San Clemente, right on the ocean. It's beautiful. And we're literally getting in the car. Everything's loaded up. Wiener Dog's in the car. And she's like, well, where did you print out the directions? And I'm like, print out the directions? She's like, yeah, we have to know how to get there. And I'm like, babe, it's California. It's a big state. We're going to hit it, you know. And I went and printed out directions. So Israel didn't have this problem. God set the destination. It's the Promised Land. He's leading them on fire and cloud. And so it should be easy, right? Let's just go. Not so much. I think if God had wiener dogs, this would be easy. But he didn't. Because my wiener dogs, do we have that? Are the best travelers ever. There's 3 of them. That's a lot. It's a pack. They climb in your lap, they put their head down, they go to sleep, and they don't wake up till we get there. Nadine drove to Florida once, from here, in her lap, asleep the entire time. It's awesome. If Moses could have done that with the Israelites, I'm sure he would have been psyched, but he didn't. He had 1 to 3 million children, basically, the children of Israel. Now, I don't have kids, but I've heard that it can be a little bit of challenging to get a family moving in one direction. Does that resonate with anybody? That's why I have what kind of things are said in the car on the road trip? What's like the number one thing said in the back seat? Are we there yet? Right, what else? There's, I'm hungry. He's touching me, right? I have to go potty. We would have been better off dying in Egypt. We said that a couple of times. I'm thirsty. My older brother, Chad, I have two brothers, a younger brother, Cody, and an older brother, Chad. And he had this concept of airspace, like sovereignty over his airspace. Because I think, I'm pretty convinced it was because we saw Top Gun at the drive-in theater at far too young of an age. But he was psyched. And so if we would encroach on his airspace by accident, he'd just punch us. And then, of course, you know, I would start screaming, and then my dad would deliver the martial punishment, like, you know. And I'd just be like, you know, my little brother's getting hit, he's asleep. But I think Moses had similar challenges, you know. I'm hot. I'm sandy. I'm hungry. Manna again? You know, the manna shakes, pickled manna, fried manna, manna tartar. I'm thirsty. Are we there yet? Non. Moses even says one point in number 17. Moses heard the people of every family wailing at the entrance of their tents. The Lord became exceedingly angry, and Moses was troubled. He asked the Lord, "Why have you brought this trouble on your servant? What have I done to displease you that you put the burden of all these people on me? Did I conceive all these people? Did I give them birth? They might be. Why did you tell me to carry them in my arms as a nurse carries an infant to the land you promised on oath to their ancestors? Where can I get meat for all these people? They keep wailing to me, give us meat to eat. I cannot carry all these people by myself. The burden is too heavy for me." If this is how you're going to treat me, please go ahead and kill me if I found favor in your eyes, and do not let me face my own ruin. We got a couple of cartoons. I found this thing called pastorhumor.com. Gem. All right, the next one. Oh yeah, this is the Wilderness Food Court. That's Manna Temptations and quails. It's both low carb and beak free, so that's good. Anything you want. You do like 90 of these things. So Moses wants to die. His people are so bad. It's like, God, if you really love me, you'll just kill me. And I think a lot of parents can relate to that on road trips. And that's why I don't have kids now. But the point is God disciplines his people. In fact, the Bible tells us that God disciplines his people 10 times. Now, that may sound like, yeah, okay, 3 million people, yeah, they're bound to suck a little bit. 10 times discipline, no big deal. But 10 times is actually a highly symbolic number in the Israelite culture. 10 represents a number of completeness. So, like there were 10 plagues in Egypt, if you remember a few weeks ago, for the Exodus. And that means that the people were completely plagued. God was really mad at Egypt. There are 10 generations between Adam and Noah. Jesus heals 10 lepers. There are 10 horns of an evil beast in Revelation, meaning he's completely evil. So what this means is that God was really frustrated with the Israelites. He disciplined them completely. He was not happy with how they worked. And I think like every good parent does on a road trip, raise your hand if you've had this experience. That's it, we're pulling the car over and someone's getting disciplined. I see one and whoa, me! All the time that happens to us. And I mean, I think he did the right thing. How many people think that God did the right thing in disciplining his people? It's kind of a trap because we're all whiners like the Israelites, right? Everybody look at your neighbor and say, I am a whiner. Don't say you are a whiner. Who said that? But the point is that we all need God's discipline. And sometimes that's a hard thing to hear because we're adults, right? We 18, some of us like 30, we left the house and yeah, some people. Just kidding. And we were like, I don't need discipline. If I'm not breaking the law, don't talk to me. Don't tell me I'm doing something wrong. But as Christians, we're called to a little bit higher standard than that. So, you know, the Israelites, they complained. God pulled the car over a few times, but they finally got there. They finally got there to a place called Kadesh. It was right on the edge of the promised land, and I imagined it went something like this.
Don't get too much sun. Now, watch out, watch out.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's just beautiful. Oh, darling. It did it, Sparky.
I love First one's here. First one's here. First one's here.
But we're so far away, Clark.
Right, right. And at the end of the day, when the lot's all full and everybody's fighting to get out of here, we'll be the first ones out, too, right? Why? Because we're the Griswolds. Come on, I'll race you.
Sorry, folks, we're closed for 2 weeks to clean and repair America's favorite family fun park. Sorry.
What?
So they get there, right, and this is the land that has been promised for 650 years. They are excited. They are finally done. They've been disciplined in the wilderness, and now they're there. They don't got to deal with that. They're going to step into the promise that God had given them. And there was a great sense of anticipation. They had sent some spies ahead to say, hey, tell us just how good that land is. And the spies came back 40 days later, and the land was good. Like, it was pretty much awesome. But there were some problems. And that's where we come to our next passage in Numbers 13, 26 through 29. They came back to Moses and Aaron and the whole Israelite community at Kadesh in the desert of Paran. And they reported to them and to the whole assembly and showed them the fruit of the land. They gave Moses this account. We went to the land which he sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is its fruit. So the fruit they were talking about was a single cluster of grapes that one guy couldn't carry by himself. They had two guys carry it on a pole between because it was so big. And they're like, a lot of grapes. But the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak there. Anak was a giant. The Amalekites live in Negev, the Hittites and Jebusites and Amorites live in the hill countries, and the Canaanites live near the sea along the Jordan. Here's the deal. There was a huge problem here. Just like Griswolds had when they got to Wally World finally. These people got there, and it was, in their eyes, closed. There were giants there. There were giants building giant fortified cities, and they were just these little Israelites, and what are they going to do? they were pretty much terrified, and understandably so. So they were ready to give up. They're like, forget it. We should have died in Egypt. You know, the kind of popular refrain. Except for two guys, Caleb and Joshua, and they kind of knew the score. Numbers 13:30 tells us, Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, we should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it. But nobody really listens. It's two guys versus between 1 and 3 million people. Only 2 people in that whole group said, no, God promised us, let's go do it. And it's kind of a cool part of Scripture, because in a minute we're going to see how God honors the faith of Caleb and Joshua, but everybody else is freaking out in the meantime. There's talks of mutiny, we should get a new leader and go back to Egypt. There's talk of stoning Moses with rocks. God thinks about killing everybody. At one point he goes, all right, Moses, I'm sick of these people. I'm going to kill them, and we're just going to start a new chosen people with you. And Moses talks God out of it, which is unfortunate. But ultimately, God does what every good father threatens to do on a long road trip when he's had enough. He threatens to turn the car around. God actually does it. My dad never did. Did anybody's dad ever turn the car around? Like, forget it, no vacation. Your dad did? Awesome. Oh, there you go. Yeah, I bet it freaked you out, though. But that's what God did. He turned him around, and he did a big circle. And he said, everyone over the age of 20, except for those who believe, just Caleb and Joshua, you're going to die in the wilderness, and your children will come and take the promised land. And this is where the road trip analogy kind of gets weird, because I never died on a road trip, like a generation never died on a road trip, which would be weird. But they spent 40 years wandering around. A couple million whiners. You thought you had it back. Did you hear that one? Pastor humor, it's cheesy, I know. And they wandered around basically because they thought that God wasn't stronger than the challenges that they faced. They looked at the obstacles, and then they looked at the promises of God, and they decided that God couldn't do it. So they turned around, and they chose to wander around in the desert rather than trust God. If you check out the map, so you see the big circle? That's what they did for 40 years. Walked in a circle. It'd be horrible. But this is the reality of being human. We all face those kind of giants in our day-to-day lives. Giants of, do I do the right thing? Where do I go? What kind of job do I get? Do I be honest in this? Do I save myself for marriage, even though that's not the cultural norm? Do I name it? We face anxiety, we face heartache, we face family trouble, we face marriage trouble. These are giant things. But the question is not, are we going to face these giants? The question is, how are we going to respond? Are we going to respond like Caleb and Joshua and say, you know what, with God on my side, I think I can do this. I'm going to trust that He's bigger than my problems. Or do we respond like most people do? Take a lap. Keep wandering in the wilderness. So everyone in the generation died, and the new apples didn't fall from the old tree. The children that were going to inherit the promised land, they were whiners too. And they get to the same spot where their fathers and mothers rejected the promised land, Kadesh. And they were like, okay, we're going to do it this time. The desert sucks. Let's go. Let's trust God. But there was a problem. This little strip of land called Edom was in between them and the promised land. And they said, hey, mind if we bring 2 million people through your land? No big deal. And the king of Edom wasn't having it. He was thinking they would, drink all the water and eat all the food, much like teenagers do. And I'm the youth person here at Uzoa. You ever seen teenagers like just devour a kitchen? I'm sure that was what he was worried about as they went through you. And so they said, no, you can't come through. And in the ultimate, like, stay off my lawn type of move, he sent his whole army to the border, like, no, you're not coming in. So the Israelites were like, crap, like, we got to go around. And so they had to turn around and go the same way their parents did, back into the desert to go around into the promised land another way. And just like their parents, they started complaining, more whining, and God disciplines them again, and this time with poisonous snakes, which is the worst kind of discipline, in my opinion. Is this kind of getting old to you? The cycle? Getting old to me. Imagine what it was like for Moses and God. You know, from here the Israelites entered the promised land. They did battle. They immediately started screwing up again, of course. But at least they made it. And the point of all this is, how are you at road trips? Because this life's a journey, you know. I mean, it sounds a little cliche, but we're all going somewhere. And what's charting your course? Are you using GPS, the God positioning system, in interest of pastor cheesiness? Or are you using your gut? Because sometimes our gut tells us to take a right, when God is telling us to take a left. And the right seems easy, and the left seems like a mountain pass or desert. But the GPS has the big picture in mind, right? Does anybody have a GPS? I was listening to Randy Frazee, the guy who came up with this curriculum, do his. And he's like, you know, the GPS, when it tells you to take a left, and you actually take a right because you think it's going to get you farther. Does anybody actually do that? Like, yeah, I don't either. I'm like, I'm not smarter than this little lady in the box. So, but the GPS has the big picture in mind, right? He knows where the destination is. He knows where to turn and where to stop and where to go. And we have a roadmap, right? It's our Bible. It gives us a lot of the right turns and the left turns and the stops and the goes that it takes for this life. But we need something more than a roadmap if you want to upgrade to the GPS, because the GPS is God in our heart. We use the map, and the GPS tells us when to turn. Like, who would rather use a map than GPS these days? Nobody? You would? Tara isn't, she's like a Girl Scout, so she knows maps well. So the important question I think to ask yourself here is, who is the driver? Because oftentimes you're the driver. Like, God can't be the driver. He's the GPS in this scenario. Don't confuse me. Oftentimes you're the driver, and usually as the driver you don't question the map, right? But as in this journey of life, how committed are you to the map? Are you a patient driver? When there's kids railing in the back seat, you just, deal the blanket punishment? And how do you deal with whiners? I think this is a big one. If you're the driver, because there's all people in our car, right? Our families, people we lead, friends that look up to you. How do you deal with those people in the back seat? Are you kind? Are you gentle? Are you patient, like Moses is? And this is the most important question, though. What do you do when you're off course? Because a lot of times we take that right, and God's telling us to take a left, and we just keep going. I'm not pulling over and asking for directions, and I'm just keeping going. But I think God calls us to turn around sometimes and go the way He wants us to go. We call this repentance in Christianity. So how good are you when you're off course? And sometimes we're not the driver, sometimes we're passengers, like when we're kids. When we're in the back seat, what kind of a passenger are you? Do you whine at your leaders? I'm hungry. Do you backseat drive? Do you try and steer things? Like, I don't like the way this is going, I'm going to try and control the situation. Do you make the driver wish they were dead? Right? Sorry, I was just going to Have you ever thrown a rock at the driver? Moses almost was stoned because he wanted to go in the promised land and because he took him out of Egypt, and they think about throwing rocks at him. But he's driving. What would they have done without it, right? They would have been pretty much up a creek without a paddle. But sometimes we do that in our own lives. We don't like how this person who's steering the ship is running things, and so we chuck a rock at him. Character assassination, gossip. You know, we're all going to face giants and troubles on this journey. We're all going to be tempted to wander. But the question is not whether we're going to do it, it's how we're going to respond, right? My dad always told me, life is 10% of what happens to you, and 90% of how you react to it, right? And it's pithy, but it's true. So the question I'm going to leave with you guys today is, will you choose to trust God, like Caleb and Joshua? Or you choose to wander in the wilderness, whining like a sissy. Right? Because this is what it's all about. This is what I've been trying to say this whole time. Those are our options. We can trust God and trust that He's bigger than our problems, or we can think our problems are too big for Him to take care of. And I don't want to end up wandering in the desert. I'm sure a lot of you guys don't either, unless you're just like Ellie, backpacking or something. It's kind of silly. Let's pray. Father God, we love you, and we just we want you to permeate our lives. We want you to come down and give us the faith we need to overcome the giants that we face. God, a lot of us are facing financial ruin and marriage problems and problems with our kids and at home and with our relationships. God, but we know that you're bigger. I pray that you would give us the faith to believe. That you would give us the faithfulness to remain true to what you say that you'll do. I love you, God, in Jesus' name. Amen. That's it. Go home.